reshaped the musical landscape in ways that opened the door for countless artists, Crosby among them. The Byrds' breakthrough hit, a jangly, harmony-drenched rendition of Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of folk rock. The song's success not only catapulted the Byrds into the spotlight, but also helped popularize Dylan's writing beyond the coffeehouse folk scene. The fusion of Dylan's lyrical genius with the electric radio-friendly stylings of a rock band proved to be a winning formula, one that would define much of 1960s pop music. It's fair to say that without Dylan blazing the trail, Crosby might not have enjoyed the same early momentum in his career. Despite this, Crosby was never one to hold his tongue, and he didn't shy away from sharing his conflicted feelings about Dylan as a person. While he respected Dylan's immense influence and acknowledged his artistic brilliance, Crosby was deeply frustrated with Dylan's aloof and unapproachable nature. In interviews, Crosby painted a portrait of a man who deliberately kept others at arm's length, a figure wrapped in myth and mystery, uninterested in genuine connection. "He doesn't let you in," Crosby once said of Dylan. "You'll say, 'Bob, where do you live?' And he'll say, 'Well, you're looking at a man that has no home.'" It was the kind of cryptic, evasive response that had become Dylan's signature. While such lines helped cement Dylan's enigmatic persona in the eyes of fans and critics, they often left his peers feeling frustrated, alienated, or simply bewildered. For Crosby, this wasn't just eccentricity, it was a barrier. As someone who valued camaraderie and collaboration, especially within the close-knit world of 1960s countercultural musicians, Crosby found Dylan's standoffishness difficult to navigate. "He's not an easy guy," Crosby explained. "To this day, he's not an easy guy. He doesn't welcome you in with open arms and show you who Bob is." This sense of distance seemed to persist even as both men aged and their careers evolved. The tension between admiration and exasperation reflects the broader dichotomy that many in Dylan's orbit experienced. On one hand, he was the high priest of song, the Nobel Prize-winning bard whose lyrics inspired a generation to think, protest, and dream. On the other, he was a famously inscrutable figure, unwilling or unable to forge meaningful, lasting bonds even with those who admired and supported him. Crosby, who was open about his own faults and challenges, often craved authenticity and mutual respect in his relationships. While Dylan was crafting a persona that could simultaneously dazzle and confound, Crosby preferred more straightforward human connection. The fact that Dylan so often hid behind riddles, metaphors, and metaphorical smokescreens seemed less like artistry to Crosby and more like deflection. Their personalities couldn't have been more different. Crosby was gregarious, warm, and often outspoken to a fault. Dylan, by contrast, was reserved, evasive, and notoriously difficult to pin down. Even among peers, he maintained a kind of theatrical detachment, as if the real Bob Dylan was a secret not meant for public or even private consumption. And yet Crosby never denied Dylan's artistic impact. There was no revisionist attempt to diminish Dylan's contributions to the musical canon. Rather, the criticism was personal, not professional. Crosby seemed to wish that the man behind the music could be as open, human, and relatable as the songs sometimes hinted he might be. This complex dynamic between admiration and disillusionment is not uncommon in artistic circles, especially among contemporaries with outsized influence. Dylan inspired Crosby and his generation to think differently about what music could be. But inspiration does not necessarily equate to intimacy, and in Dylan's case, it often did the opposite. His mystique created distance. For Crosby, that distance was ultimately frustrating, a wall that not even years of shared history in the same cultural revolution could tear down. Chris Frantz, Talking Heads drummer. Chris Frantz has always been known as one of the more thoughtful and musically literate figures in the world of post-punk and new wave. But when it comes to Bob Dylan, the legendary bard of folk rock, France clearly harbors a personal grudge that goes beyond the usual musical rivalries or generational divides. While there's no denying Dylan's colossal impact on modern music, France's comments make it plain that admiration doesn't necessarily equate to respect, especially when personal slights are involved. The source of France's ire became clear in 2022, following the release of Dylan's book, The Philosophy of Modern Song. In the book, Dylan offers a sprawling and idiosyncratic collection of essays on various artists and songs that have shaped popular music. True to his style, Dylan blends praise with provocation, often making sweeping declarations that are equal parts insightful and inflammatory. One such declaration struck a nerve with France. Dylan's claim that Elvis Costello and the Attractions were a better band than any of their contemporaries, light years better. On the surface, Dylan's praise for the Attractions could be seen as one of many subjective flourishes in the book, which is more essay collection than definitive historical account. But for France, the comment crossed a line, not only because it seemed to dismiss the Talking Heads and other bands of their era, but because it came from someone who had already years earlier treated one of France's friends with palpable rudeness. In a public social media post responding to Dylan's assertion, France wrote, "I love Bob Dylan's new book, The Philosophy of Modern Song, but I have one little bone to pick with the author when he writes, Elvis Costello and the Attractions were a better band than any of their contemporaries. Light years better." With all due respect to the Attractions and to drummer Pete Thomas in particular, I'd like to say to Bob something he once said to a buddy of mine. Suck a dick. That last sentence wasn't just a mic drop, it was personal. The quote France attributes to Dylan, suck a dick, suggests that the folk legend had, at some earlier point, been dismissive or outright vulgar to someone France held dear. While France didn't elaborate on the exact context, the insult clearly lingered, turning what might have been a simple disagreement over artistic merit into something much more visceral. To understand the depth of France's reaction, it helps to place both artists in their historical context. Talking Heads emerged in the mid-1970s as part of the New York punk and new wave scene centered around CBGB. With David Byrne's anxious vocals, Tina Weymouth's innovative bass lines, and France's crisp, angular drumming, the band brought an intellectual and rhythmic complexity that set them apart from many of their peers. Albums like Remain in Light and Speaking in Tongues broke ground with their fusion of rock, funk, Afrobeat, and art pop, earning the band both critical acclaim and a fiercely loyal fan base. By contrast, Dylan's music, rooted in folk, blues, and Americana, had largely retreated from its countercultural peak by the time Talking Heads were at their most active. While he continued to tour and release albums through the 70s and 80s, his influence by then had become more canonical than current. To France, and likely many others of his generation, Dylan was part of the establishment they were trying to push against, an icon whose innovations were undeniable, but whose present-day relevance was more open to interpretation. It's also worth noting that France, in choosing to defend his contemporaries, didn't deny that the Attractions were a great band. His specific mention of Pete Thomas, the Attractions' drummer, as a musician he respects, suggests that France's issue wasn't with Costello's group per se, but with the sweeping dismissal of everyone else. To claim that one band was light years better than all others is not only hyperbolic but, in France's view, needlessly disrespectful, especially coming from someone like Dylan, who many younger artists once looked up to as a symbol of poetic truth-telling and authenticity. Liam Gallagher has never been one to hold back his opinions. Brash, unapologetic, and often controversial, the former Oasis frontman has built a reputation not only for his music, but for his colorful commentary on the music industry and its many legends. While it's well known that Gallagher has an almost religious admiration for the Beatles, particularly John Lennon, his feelings toward other iconic artists are often far less reverent. One such figure who hasn't earned a place in Gallagher's personal pantheon is Bob Dylan. In an interview from 2011, Gallagher delivered a characteristically blunt assessment of Dylan, saying, "He's a bit of a miserable cunt as far as I'm concerned." That single sentence distilled Gallagher's famously irreverent approach to music criticism. While the comment ruffled more than a few feathers among Dylan devotees, it wasn't entirely out of character for the Mancunian singer, whose disdain for perceived pretentiousness and overhyped legacy acts is as deeply ingrained as his affection for parkas and tambourines. To be fair, Gallagher wasn't entirely dismissive. He did concede a soft spot for one of Dylan's more accessible songs. "Lay, Lady, Lay" is all right. But that was about as far as his praise extended. Unlike legions of artists and fans who cite Dylan as a seminal influence, Gallagher remained defiantly unimpressed. "But he doesn't really do it for me," he said. "All those fuckers playing their greatest hits are shitbags." That last remark, equally scathing and self-reflective, encapsulates a central paradox in Gallagher's worldview. While he sneers at legacy acts endlessly touring on the strength of their back catalogs, Oasis itself has long been defined by a nostalgia-fueled reverence for its greatest hits. Tracks like Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, and Champagne Supernova still loom large over British music history, and Gallagher himself continues to perform them regularly as a solo artist. His dig at shitbags playing greatest hits could be seen as a swipe at artists who, in his view, lack freshness or relevance. But it also invites questions about how he might see himself if an Oasis reunion ever did materialize. Gallagher's criticisms of Dylan reflect a broader discomfort with artists who present themselves as untouchable or overly poetic. Where Dylan is known for his literary, often cryptic lyrics and a guarded, elusive public persona, Gallagher thrives on directness, swagger, and emotional immediacy. He has little patience for what he perceives as pretense, and Dylan's mystique, carefully curated over decades, is the kind of thing that Gallagher instinctively rebels against. It's worth noting that Gallagher's musical tastes, while wide-ranging, tend to orbit around raw melodic rock and roll with attitude and immediacy. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Sex Pistols, the Stone Roses, these are the artists who inform his sensibilities. Dylan's sprawling lyrical narratives and folk-rooted sound don't fit neatly into Gallagher's vision of rock as a blunt instrument of truth and rebellion. Dylan may be a poet to some, but to Gallagher, he's just a bloke with a guitar who never quite lit the spark. In some ways, Gallagher's critique also reflects the generational and cultural divide between British working-class rock and American folk tradition.